The day my grandmother took her last breath, I was the only one in the room. I had driven 4 hours from Columbus to her house in Macon, Georgia, because the hospice nurse called me on a Tuesday morning and said her breathing had changed. I didn't pack a bag. I grabbed my keys, told my manager I had a family emergency, and drove straight through without stopping except once for gas. I made it in time. I held her hand. I talked to her about the summer she taught me to fish at the pond behind her property, about the way she used to hum while she made biscuits on Sunday mornings, about how much I loved her. She passed at 4:17 in the afternoon with her hand in mine, and the window cracked open just enough to let in the smell of Georgia pine. My brother did not come. My sister did not come. My 2 uncles, my aunt, 4 cousins who all lived within 2 hours of Macon. None of them came. My brother, Daniel, texted me at 11 that morning to say he had a work thing he couldn't get out of. My sister, Claire, sent a voice message saying she was sorry, but the kids had something at school. My Uncle Russ didn't respond at all until 3 days later. No one called. No one asked if I needed anything. No one asked how she was doing in those final hours. My grandmother's name was Ruth. She was 81 years old, and she had spent the last 4 years of her life slowly disappearing into herself. First her short-term memory, then her ability to drive, then her ability to live alone. I had been making that 4-hour drive every 2 to 3 weeks for 2 years. I handled her doctor's appointments, her medications, her finances, her house repairs. I was the one who sat with her when she forgot where she was and got scared. I was the one who stayed on the phone with her at midnight when she thought there was someone in the backyard and there wasn't. I was the one who rearranged my apartment, my schedule, my entire life around her. My family knew all of this. They thanked me for it, the way people thank someone for doing something they have no intention of doing themselves. Warmly, briefly, and without follow-through. After Grandma Ruth passed, I called my mother to tell her. My mother is her daughter-in-law, married to my father, who died 6 years ago. She and my grandmother had always been close, or so she said. My mother's response was to cry for a few minutes, then ask me what the plan was. I said I didn't have one yet, that I'd just watched her take her last breath 40 minutes ago. My mother said, "Okay, just keep me posted." Then she asked if I'd eaten anything. I hadn't. I hadn't eaten since the night before. I drove to a Waffle House down the road and sat in a corner booth and stared at the table for a long time before I ordered anything. The waitress, an older woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, looked at me once and said, "You okay, honey?" I told her my grandmother had just passed. She patted my hand and brought me coffee without asking, and she refilled it twice without me asking. That woman showed me more kindness in 40 minutes than my entire extended family had shown me in 4 years. The funeral was the following Saturday. I arranged everything. The funeral home, the flowers, the obituary, the reception. I called the pastor at the church Grandma Ruth had attended for 30 years. I went through her address book and called people she'd known. I wrote her eulogy on a Thursday night, sitting at her kitchen table, because I couldn't bring myself to sleep anywhere else in the house. 12 people came to the funeral. 12. All of them were her friends, her neighbors, people from her church. Not one member of my family showed up except me and my mother, who flew in from Phoenix and spent most of the reception telling people how close she and Grandma Ruth had been. Daniel called the night before the funeral to say he was really sorry, but flights were expensive last minute, and he just couldn't make it work financially. He earns more than I do. He has for years. He did not offer to help with any of the costs I'd already put on my credit card. Claire sent flowers to the funeral home with a card that said, "She will be forever in our hearts." The flowers arrived 2 hours after the service ended. Uncle Russ texted me a week later to say he'd been meaning to reach out, but things had been busy. I stared at that message for a full minute before I put my phone face down on the counter and walked away. In the weeks following the funeral, I went through Grandma Ruth's house slowly, carefully, the way you do when every object in a room was touched by someone you loved. I found photographs, letters, an old recipe box with her handwriting on every card. I also found, in a fireproof box under her bed, a sealed envelope addressed to her attorney, and another sealed envelope addressed to me with my full name on it. My name, written in her handwriting, clear and deliberate. I didn't open mine right away. I wasn't ready. The attorney's name was Margaret Hollis. She had been handling my grandmother's legal affairs for over a decade. She called me 3 weeks after the funeral and asked me to come in at my earliest convenience. I drove down to Macon on a Wednesday. I sat across from Margaret in her office, and she placed a copy of the will on the desk between us. I want to tell you what was in that will, but first I need to tell you what happened the night before I went to that meeting. Daniel called me. It was the most he'd spoken to me since the funeral. Since before the funeral, actually. He asked how I was doing, which surprised me. We talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular, and then he said casually, the way people say things they've been building up to. Hey, do you know anything about what Grandma left behind? Like, the house and everything? I said I had a meeting with the attorney the next day. He said, oh yeah, makes sense. I'm sure she left things pretty evenly. She was always fair. I said I didn't know anything yet. He said, well, she had that property, and the house has got to be worth something these days, and I know she had some savings. Just, curious. I said I'd let him know after the meeting. He said, sure. Hey, maybe we could all get together sometime soon. It's been too long. I agreed that it had been too long. Then I hung up the phone and sat in the dark for a while. The next morning I sat in Margaret Hollis's office and she walked me through the will. My grandmother had left the house and the property, 1.8 acres in Macon, assessed at $310,000, to me. She had left her savings account, which held $214,000, to me. She had left her car, her jewelry, and all personal property to me. She had left a $5,000 gift to her church, and she had left a handwritten note for Margaret to read aloud to me if I came to the meeting alone, which said, Marcus has shown up every single time. He knows why he's getting this. The others do not need an explanation. Marcus is my name. I drove back to Columbus that afternoon, feeling like I was carrying something very heavy and very delicate at the same time. I was grateful. I was also grief-stricken in a way that hadn't fully landed yet, and I was quietly bracing for what I already knew was coming. It took 4 days. Claire called first. She opened with how much she missed Grandma Ruth, how she wished she could have been there more, how hard it had been. Then she asked if I'd met with the attorney. I said yes. She said, so how did she divide everything up? And I heard in her voice that she already expected to hear her own name in the answer. I told her the truth. I told her that Grandma Ruth had left everything to me. There was a long pause. Then Claire said, everything? I said yes. She said, Marcus, there must be some mistake. She wouldn't just leave Daniel and me out. We're her grandchildren too. I said I understood that, and that there was no mistake. She said she needed to think. She said she'd call me back. Daniel called the next morning. His tone was different from Claire's. Less shock, more strategy. He said he'd been talking to a few people and wanted to make sure I understood that wills could be contested, that there were legal grounds sometimes when family members had been excluded, that he wasn't threatening anything, just saying. I told him I understood. He said, look, I know you were there a lot for her, and we all appreciate that. But we're family. She raised all of us. It doesn't seem right that one person just gets everything. I asked him where he was the Tuesday she died. He said that wasn't fair. I said I wasn't trying to be unfair. I was asking a real question. I asked him when was the last time he'd driven to Macon to see her. He couldn't answer that. I asked him if he remembered the name of her primary care doctor. He said that wasn't the point. I asked him if he knew about the fall she had in the bathroom in February of last year, and the 2 hours I spent on the phone with the ER before I could get there. He went quiet. I told him that I wasn't angry at him. I told him that I understood life gets busy and people make choices, but I also told him that Grandma Ruth had made a choice too, and that it was hers to make, and that I was going to honor it. He said he'd be talking to an attorney. I said that was his right. I hung up the phone and I sat down on my kitchen floor, not my couch, the floor, and I just breathed for a while. I had known this was coming. I had known since Margaret read me that note. But knowing something is coming and feeling it arrive are two different things. Over the next 2 weeks, my phone filled up with messages from people I'd barely spoken to in years. My Uncle Russ, suddenly very available, called to say he thought the whole thing should be handled as a family. One of my cousins, a woman named Bethany who I'd seen twice in the last decade, sent me a long message about family legacy and how Grandma Ruth would have wanted everyone taken care of. Another cousin I'll call Trevor sent me a text that just said, "Bro, this isn't right," which I found somehow both the most offensive and the most honest communication I received. My mother, to her credit, stayed out of it. She called me once to say she was sorry I was dealing with this, and that she thought Grandma Ruth had known exactly what she was doing. That was the most useful thing anyone said to me in that entire period. I consulted with Margaret, who told me that contesting the will would be very difficult, given that Grandma Ruth had been of sound mind when she made it 3 years prior, that it had been properly witnessed and notarized, and that there was extensive documentation of her intentions. I also spoke with a separate attorney of my own, just to be sure. The conclusion was the same. The will was solid. Daniel did not actually hire an attorney. Or if he did, that attorney told him what Margaret told me, because after 2 weeks of escalating messages and one very tense phone call involving Daniel, Claire, and my Uncle Russ, all on the line at once, the pressure campaign simply stopped. What I got was silence. And in some ways, silence was harder. I sold the house in Macon 4 months later. I want to say that was an easy decision, but it wasn't. I walked through every room before closing, the same way I'd walked through it after she passed. I stood in the kitchen where she'd made those Sunday biscuits for 30 years. I stood on the back porch and looked at the pine trees. I let myself feel all of it. With the proceeds from the sale and the savings she left me, I had enough to do something I had been thinking about for a long time. I set up a small foundation. I worked with Margaret and a nonprofit consultant to structure it properly. The foundation's purpose is to provide financial support and respite care resources for family caregivers, people who are doing exactly what I had done, making the drives, managing the medications, sitting in the rooms, carrying the weight, often without recognition, often without help, often without anyone asking if they're okay. I named the foundation after my grandmother, her full name, all 3 names, on the letterhead, on the website, on everything. Ruth Elaine Carmody Foundation. The first grant cycle opened 6 months after I registered it. We received 43 applications from caregivers across the Southeast. I read every one of them. I recognized something in almost every story. The exhaustion, the love, the particular specific loneliness of being the one who showed up. My family does not know the details of what I've done with the money. I didn't tell them, and they haven't asked. The communication between us has been minimal. A text at Christmas, a like on a birthday post, the kind of surface contact that people maintain when the relationship beneath it has changed permanently, but no one has officially said so. A few months after the foundation launched, I got a message from Daniel. It was longer than his usual texts. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking. He said he knew he hadn't been there the way he should have been, for Grandma Ruth or for me. He said he wasn't reaching out about the money, just to say he was sorry. He said he hoped I was doing okay. I read the message 3 times. I believed him, actually. I believe people can be sorry. I believe grief does things to people, and so does money, and so does the confrontation with who you've been versus who you thought you were. I didn't respond that day. I thought about what I wanted to say for a while. Eventually, I wrote back. I told him I appreciated him saying that. I told him I was doing okay. I told him a little about the foundation, not everything. Just that I'd done something with the money that felt right to me, something that honored her. I didn't invite him to call. I didn't suggest getting together. I left it where it was. He replied with one line. She would have loved that. I think she would have too. There is a photograph on my desk, just one. It's from about 3 years ago, taken on a Sunday afternoon in her backyard. Grandma Ruth is sitting in her lawn chair, wearing a yellow cardigan, squinting a little against the sun, and she is laughing at something I said. I don't even remember what I said. I just remember she laughed, really laughed, the kind of laugh that made her whole face change. I look at that photograph a lot, not because it makes me sad, though it does sometimes, but because it reminds me what any of this was actually about. Not the house, not the money, not the will, not the phone calls and the pressure and the silence that followed. It was about showing up. It was about being there on a Tuesday afternoon when nobody else came. It was about knowing that when you love someone, you find a way to be present, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you something. She knew that. She had known it her whole life. I think that's what she was trying to tell me, in the end. Not with the money, but with my name on that envelope in her handwriting. Deliberate and clear, like she'd written it knowing exactly what it would mean when I found it. She saw me. All those Tuesday drives, all those midnight phone calls, all those hours in waiting rooms and pharmacies and hospice hallways. She saw every one of them. And in the end, that mattered more than anything else anyone could have given me.